The wagon wheel cracked apart on the rocky Colorado Trail, and Victoria Thornton knew her remaining coins would never cover its repair, much less the food her stomach had been crying for these past 3 days. She sat there in the dust, her traveling dress torn at the hem and stained beyond recognition, watching the splintered wood settle into an accusatory pattern at her feet. The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the high mountain pass between Telluride and Rico, and she could feel the heat radiating up from the hard, packed earth. Her horse, equally exhausted, hung his head low. The canteen at her hip held perhaps 2 swallows of water. The leather satchel beside her contained a single spare dress, a daguerreotype of her parents, and absolutely nothing edible. Victoria closed her eyes and felt the familiar burn of tears, but refused to let them fall. Crying would waste water, and she had learned in the week since leaving Telluride that water was more precious than gold in these mountains during the dry season of August 1884. She had been surviving on pride and whatever rainwater she could collect in her canteen when the occasional afternoon storm rolled through, but the clouds had been sparse for days now. The sound of hoofbeats made her eyes snap open. A rider approached from the direction of Rico, leading a pack mule behind his paint horse. Even from a distance, she could see the easy way he sat in the saddle, the broad-brimmed hat shading his face, the rifle secured to his saddle. Every instinct told her to stand, to brush off her dress, to present some semblance of dignity. But her legs trembled when she tried to rise, and she had to grip the broken wagon to steady herself. The cowboy reined in his horse a respectful distance away, close enough to speak but far enough that he would not seem threatening. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes, a striking blue-gray, took in the scene with quick intelligence. The broken wagon, the exhausted horse, the woman who was clearly at the end of her resources. "Afternoon, miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was low and careful, as if he understood that the wrong word might shatter whatever fragile composure she was maintaining. "That is a bad break. You heading into Rico." Victoria straightened her spine, reaching for the pride that had sustained her through her father's death 6 months ago, through the discovery that his mining claim was worthless, through the sale of everything she owned to pay his debts. "I was," she said, and was grateful her voice did not shake. I seemed to have encountered a slight delay. Something flickered in his expression, and she braced herself for pity. But instead, he simply nodded, as if breaking down on a mountain pass with no provisions was merely an inconvenience rather than a potential death sentence. "These trails are rough on wheels," he said conversationally. "I broke an axle on this same stretch last spring. Took me the better part of a day to rig something that would get me to town." He dismounted, moving slowly and deliberately, and she noticed he kept his hands visible, non-threatening. "Name is Xavier Ingram," he said. "I run a small ranch about 5 miles outside Rico. Been up to Telluride picking up supplies." He gestured to the heavily laden pack mule. "Victoria Thornton," she replied, because manners were all she had left. Xavier walked around the wagon, examining the damage with a practiced eye. "This is not going anywhere without a new wheel," he said finally. "But your horse looks sound enough, just tired and thirsty. I have got water for him if you would permit me." The offer was so carefully phrased, asking permission rather than simply acting, that Victoria felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "Thank you," she said. "That would be kind." She watched as he retrieved a folding canvas bucket from his pack and poured water from one of his canteens. Her own horse nearly pushed her aside in his eagerness to drink, and she had to step back. Xavier refilled the bucket twice more before the animal was satisfied. "I am going to water my own horses," Xavier said. "And then I was planning to stop for a meal before pushing on to Rico. Would you join me? I have got more than I can eat, and it seems a shame to waste it." The words were so carefully neutral, so devoid of pity or judgment, that Victoria almost accepted immediately. But pride was a powerful thing, and she had been raised by a father who believed in paying one's debts. "I could not impose," she said stiffly. Xavier looked at her directly then, and his eyes were kind but also knowing. "Miss Thornton, I am going to lay out food whether you eat or not, because I am hungry and this is where I plan to stop. If you sit over there and watch me eat, that is your choice. But it seems to me that food tastes better with company, and I have been traveling alone for 3 days. So really, you would be doing me a favor." It was so transparently an attempt to preserve her dignity that Victoria felt her eyes sting again. But there was also truth in his words. He was laying out a blanket in the shade of a large boulder, unpacking supplies from his saddlebags. The smell of cured meat and fresh bread made her stomach clench painfully. "I suppose," she said slowly, "that I could provide conversation if that would be useful." "That would be very useful," Xavier said solemnly, though she caught the smallest hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. She walked over on unsteady legs and sat on the edge of the blanket, trying to maintain some semblance of propriety. Xavier laid out an impressive array of food: bread that could not be more than a day old, hard cheese, dried beef, apples that must have cost a fortune this far from any orchard, and a jar of what looked like preserved peaches. "Please help yourself," he said, settling on the opposite side of the blanket and pulling his knife to cut the bread and cheese. Victoria told herself to eat slowly, to maintain dignity, but the moment she bit into the bread her body overruled her mind. She ate with single-minded focus, barely tasting the food in her desperation to fill the gnawing emptiness. When she finally looked up, Xavier was eating his own meal, his attention apparently focused on the mountain vista before them rather than on her lack of table manners. "How long since you have eaten?" he asked quietly, still not looking at her. Victoria could have lied, should have lied. But something about his careful kindness, the way he had offered without making her feel like a beggar, loosened her tongue. 3 days, she admitted. "I had a little jerky, but it ran out outside Telluride." He nodded as if this was interesting information rather than a confession of desperation. "These mountains are unforgiving," he said. "I nearly starved my first winter here back in '79. Thought I knew everything about ranching because I had worked cattle in Texas. Turned out Colorado winters are a different beast entirely." It was clearly a story meant to make her feel less alone in her struggle, and Victoria found herself grateful for it. "Where in Texas?" she asked. "Near Austin," Xavier said. "Worked on my uncle's ranch from the time I was 12 until I was 21. Then I got it in my head that I wanted my own place, and I had heard there was good land up here for a man willing to work for it. Has it been worth it?" Victoria asked, accepting the canteen he offered and taking a careful sip of water. Xavier considered this, his gaze still on the mountains. "Some days yes, some days no," he said honestly. "It is a hard life, harder than I expected, but it is mine, you know. Every fence post I set, every calf that survives the winter, every acre I clear, it is all mine. That means something." Victoria understood that in her bones. Her father had felt the same way about his mining claim, even when it became clear it would never yield the silver he had hoped for. "My father had a claim near Telluride," she said. "He worked it for 3 years. He was so certain he would strike it rich." "But he did not?" Xavier asked gently. "He struck his death," Victoria said, and was surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. A tunnel collapsed last February. He lingered for 2 weeks before he died. The doctor's bills took everything we had saved. The claim turned out to be worthless. I could not even sell it to cover the debts. I sold our house, our furniture, everything. I had just enough left to buy that wagon and horse and stake myself to a fresh start in Rico. I heard they need a school teacher. They do, Xavier confirmed. The town has been trying to hire one for months. Most teachers take one look at how remote we are and keep moving to Denver or Colorado Springs. Remoteness does not bother me, Victoria said, taking another piece of cheese when Xavier pushed the package toward her. Starvation, on the other hand, is somewhat concerning. She had not meant it as a joke, but Xavier smiled anyway. I imagine it would be, he said. Well, Miss Thornton, I have a proposition for you if you would hear it. Victoria stiffened, every protective instinct flaring to life. She had heard propositions before from men who thought a woman alone was fair game. Xavier must have seen something in her face because he raised both hands, palms out. Nothing improper, he said quickly. I meant a business proposition. You need to get to Rico. Your wagon is broken. I have horses and am heading that way myself. I would be happy to loan you my pack mule to ride. When we reach Rico, if you get the teaching position, and I cannot imagine why you would not, you can pay me back by teaching my sister to read. Victoria blinked. Your sister? Maggie, Xavier said, and there was deep affection in his voice. She is 16. Our parents died when she was small, and I was too busy trying to keep us fed to worry much about schooling. She can read a little, enough to get by, but she wants to learn properly. She is always asking me to help, but I am not much of a teacher. She would be over the moon to work with a real school teacher. It was a generous offer, far more generous than the service warranted. That seems hardly a fair trade, Victoria said. A few reading lessons in exchange for the use of a mule and likely provisions to keep me fed until I receive my first salary. Xavier shrugged. Maggie's education is worth a great deal to me, he said simply. And besides, Rico needs a teacher. Helping you get there benefits the whole town. Victoria studied him, trying to understand his angle, but his expression was open, honest, without any hint of ulterior motive. Why are you helping me? She asked bluntly. He was quiet for a moment, packing up the remaining food carefully. 5 years ago, I was lying in the snow with a broken leg, certain I was going to die, he said finally. A Ute trapper found me, loaded me on his sled, and took me to his winter camp. His family fed me and cared for me for 3 weeks until I could travel again. When I tried to thank him, to offer payment, he said that the mountains were hard enough without people making them harder on each other. That has always stuck with me. He looked at her then, his blue-gray eyes steady. You are in a hard spot through no fault of your own. I have the means to help. It seems simple to me. Victoria felt something crack in her chest, some defensive wall she had built up over months of grief and struggle. I accept, she said, her voice rough. And thank you, Mr. Ingram, truly. Xavier, please, he said, standing and offering his hand to help her up. We are going to be neighbors, after all. His hand was calloused and strong, and Victoria found herself holding on perhaps a moment longer than necessary. When she released him, she felt steadier than she had in days, and not just because of the food in her stomach. They worked together to transfer her meager belongings from the wagon to the pack mule. Xavier gave her a proper saddle, his spare, he claimed, though she suspected he was giving up his own comfort for hers. He rigged a lead line so the mule would follow his horse and helped her mount with the same careful courtesy he had shown throughout. We should reach Rico before dark, he said, swinging into his own saddle. It is only about 8 miles from here. Are you steady enough to ride? I am much better now, thank you, Victoria said, and realized it was true. Food and water and simple human kindness had worked a miracle. They rode in companionable silence at first, saving their energy for the trail. But as the afternoon wore on and the path became easier, they began to talk. Xavier asked about her father, and Victoria found herself sharing stories she had not told anyone since his death: his terrible singing voice, his habit of naming the rocks in his mine, his absolute conviction that the next strike would be the big one. "He sounds like he was a good man," Xavier said. "He was," Victoria agreed. "Terrible with money and far too optimistic, but good. He loved my mother so much. When she died of influenza 5 years ago, something went out of him. I think the mining was his way of trying to find purpose again." "And you took care of him," Xavier said. "It was not a question. I was all he had," Victoria said simply, "and he was all I had. We took care of each other." Xavier nodded, understanding. "It was like that with Maggie and me after our parents died. She was only 6. I was 17, barely more than a kid myself. I had no idea how to raise a little girl, but I learned." "That must have been incredibly difficult," Victoria said, trying to imagine an 18-year-old boy caring for a small child alone. "It was," Xavier admitted, "but also the best thing I ever did. Maggie kept me going when I wanted to give up. She needed me, so I had to figure it out. She is smart as a whip, that girl. She deserves every opportunity." The affection in his voice made Victoria smile. "I look forward to meeting her. She will love you," Xavier predicted. "She has been begging me to take her to Telluride to meet the teacher there, but it is too far for a day trip, and I cannot spare the time for longer. Having a teacher right in Rico will make her year." They crested a ridge, and suddenly the town of Rico spread out below them in a narrow valley. It was small, perhaps 200 souls, but it had the look of a place that was growing. There was a main street with a mercantile, a saloon, a church, and various other buildings. Houses dotted the hillsides, and Victoria could see mining operations on the surrounding peaks. "It is beautiful," she said, surprised by how much she meant it. After the past months of struggle, any place that offered the possibility of stability looked like paradise. "It is home," Xavier agreed. "Come on. I will take you to Mrs. Patterson. She runs the boarding house. She is also on the school board, so she is the one you need to talk to about the teaching position." They rode down into town, drawing curious looks from the people on the street. Victoria was acutely aware of her disheveled appearance, but Xavier's presence beside her seemed to lend her legitimacy. He exchanged greetings with several people, introducing her casually as Miss Thornton, the new teacher, as if it were already decided. The boarding house was a tidy 2-story building with a wide front porch. Xavier helped Victoria dismount, and she swayed slightly, her legs unsteady after hours in the saddle. "Easy," Xavier said, his hand under her elbow. "You have been through a lot today." Before Victoria could respond, the front door flew open and a woman emerged. She was perhaps 50, with steel-gray hair pinned in a no-nonsense bun and sharp eyes that took in everything at once. "Xavier Ingram, what have you brought me?" she asked, but her tone was warm. "A schoolteacher, Mrs. Patterson, if you will have her," Xavier said. "Miss Victoria Thornton, lately of Telluride. She had some trouble on the trail, and I offered her transport." Mrs. Patterson's gaze softened as she looked at Victoria. "You look done in, dear. Come inside. I have stew on the stove and a room made up. We can discuss the teaching position after you have rested." "I do not have money for a room," Victoria said, hating the admission but refusing to mislead. "Not until I have a salary." "The school board pays for the teacher's lodging," Mrs. Patterson said briskly. "Has for both the previous teachers we hired, though neither stayed more than a month. The room is yours, salary or not, until we determine whether you suit. Now come in before you fall over." It was so matter-of-fact, so blessedly free of judgment that Victoria felt her eyes sting for the third time that day. "Thank you," she managed. Xavier caught her eye. "I will bring your things in," he said, "and I will check on you tomorrow if that is all right." To discuss the arrangement with Maggie. "Of course," Victoria said, "and Xavier, thank you for everything." He touched his hat brim and smiled at her, a real smile that lit his eyes and made her breath catch slightly. "Welcome to Rico, Victoria," he said, then Mrs. Patterson was ushering her inside, up a narrow staircase to a small but immaculately clean room with a real bed and a window overlooking the mountains. Victoria sat on the edge of the bed and felt the last of her strength give out. Mrs. Patterson brought her stew and bread and stayed while she ate, asking gentle questions about her qualifications and experience. Victoria had taught in a small school in Kansas before her father dragged her to Colorado chasing his silver dreams. She had 3 years of experience and good references, though those references were 2 years out of date. Mrs. Patterson seemed satisfied. "The position is yours if you want it," she said finally. $30 a month plus room and board here with me. School is Monday through Friday, 8 to 3. You will have about 20 students ages 6 to 14. Some are ahead, some are behind, and you will need to teach them all together. Can you manage that? $30 a month. It was not a fortune, but it was stability. It was survival. It was a future. "Yes," Victoria said firmly. "I can manage that." "Good," Mrs. Patterson said. "School starts in 2 weeks, first Monday of September. That gives you time to settle in and prepare. Get some rest now, dear. You look like you need it." After she left, Victoria lay back on the bed, still fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. She had done it. She had survived the grief and the poverty and the desperate journey. She had a position, a place to live, a future that did not involve starvation or worse. And she had Xavier Ingram to thank for it. The cowboy who had found her at her lowest point and offered help without hurting her dignity, who had given her food and transportation, and treated her like a person rather than a problem. She thought of his kind eyes, his careful courtesy, the warmth in his voice when he spoke of his sister. She would repay him, she vowed. She would teach Maggie everything she knew, and she would find other ways to help as well. She would not be a charity case forever. She would prove that his faith in her was warranted. But for now, she let herself sleep, deeply and dreamlessly, for the first time in months. The next morning, Victoria woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee wafting up from downstairs. For a moment, she was disoriented, and then memory flooded back. Rico. The teaching position. Xavier. She washed as best she could with the basin and pitcher provided, changed into her spare dress, which was in marginally better condition than the one she had worn yesterday, and went downstairs. Mrs. Patterson was in the dining room, serving breakfast to 3 other boarders. 2 men who looked like miners and an older woman who introduced herself as Miss Harriet, the dressmaker. "Sit, sit," Mrs. Patterson commanded, and Victoria found herself with a plate of eggs and bacon and potatoes before she could protest. After months of near starvation, the abundance was overwhelming. The miners left quickly, heading for their claims, but Miss Harriet lingered over her coffee. "So you are the new teacher," she said, studying Victoria with the frank appraisal of someone who made their living assessing people's measurements. "I hope you will stay. The children need consistency." "I intend to stay," Victoria said firmly. "Good," Miss Harriet said. "You will need proper dresses for the schoolroom. Come by my shop this afternoon. I will make you 2 serviceable dresses at cost. Consider it an investment in the town's future." Victoria wanted to protest, but the truth was her current dresses were barely held together. "I will pay you as soon as I receive my first salary," she said. "That will be fine, dear," Miss Harriet said placidly. After breakfast, Victoria explored the town. Rico was small but well established, with most of the amenities a frontier town needed. The school was a simple one-room building on the edge of town, with benches for the students and a desk for the teacher. It was clean but basic, and Victoria immediately began making mental lists of supplies she would need. She was examining the few books on the shelf, a mix of primers and readers in various states of repair, when she heard the schoolhouse door open. She turned to find Xavier standing in the doorway, hat in hand, with a teenage girl beside him. The girl had Xavier's dark hair and the same blue-gray eyes, though hers sparkled with an enthusiasm that made her seem younger than her 16 years. She was pretty, Victoria thought, or would be if she were not bouncing on her toes like an eager puppy. "Miss Thornton," Xavier said, and Victoria felt a strange little flutter at hearing her name in his voice. "I would like you to meet my sister, Maggie. Maggie, this is Miss Victoria Thornton, the new teacher." "Oh, I am so happy to meet you." Maggie burst out, rushing forward to clasp Victoria's hands. "Xavier told me all about you, about how you are going to teach at the school and maybe help me with my reading. Is it true? Will you really teach me?" Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Victoria found herself smiling genuinely for the first time in months. "I would be delighted to teach you, Maggie. Your brother tells me you have been working on your reading already." "A little," Maggie said, suddenly shy. "I can read easy words, but the harder ones trip me up. And I want to read real books, you know, stories and things. Xavier tries to help, but he is so busy with the ranch." "We will work on it together," Victoria promised. "Perhaps we could start with a few lessons before school begins. It would help me prepare for teaching a full classroom." "Really?" Maggie's face lit up. "That would be wonderful. Oh, Xavier, did you hear? We can start right away, I heard," Xavier said, and his smile was warm as he looked at his sister. But when his gaze shifted to Victoria, something in it made her pulse quicken. "That is generous of you, Victoria. Are you certain you are recovered enough? Mrs. Patterson said you were exhausted yesterday." "I am much better," Victoria assured him. "A good meal and a night's sleep worked wonders." "Several good meals," Xavier corrected gently, "which is why I brought these." He produced a basket from behind his back, covered with a cloth. "Some supplies from the ranch. Eggs, butter, some vegetables from Maggie's garden. Mrs. Patterson can use them, or you can, however you prefer." Victoria looked at the basket, then at Xavier's face. He was watching her carefully, clearly braced for her to refuse. But she had learned something yesterday. Sometimes pride had to bend to practicality, especially when generosity was offered with genuine kindness. "Thank you," she said simply. "That is very thoughtful." The relief in his expression was subtle but unmistakable. "It is nothing. We have more than we need right now." They arranged for Maggie to come to the boarding house 3 afternoons a week for reading lessons, starting the following day. After they left, Victoria sat at the teacher's desk and let herself feel something she had not felt in a long time: hope. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Victoria prepared the schoolhouse, met with parents, and began working with Maggie on her reading. The girl was bright and eager, progressing quickly once she had proper instruction. More importantly, the reading lessons gave Victoria an excuse to see Xavier regularly. He brought Maggie to town and picked her up, and each time he lingered a little longer, talking to Victoria about the town, the ranch, life in Colorado. Victoria found herself looking forward to those conversations more than she should. Xavier was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and a thoughtfulness that showed in everything he did. He never mentioned her destitute state when he found her on the trail, never made her feel less than equal. He treated her as what she was, a professional woman making her way in the world. But there were moments when their eyes met and held, when his hand brushed hers as they both reached for a book, when she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. Moments that suggested his feelings might be evolving beyond simple neighborly kindness. Victoria told herself not to read too much into it. She had a position to establish, a reputation to build. She could not afford romantic entanglements, especially not with the man who had saved her life. The debt between them was too great, the power imbalance too significant, but her heart, it seemed, had different ideas. School started on a bright September morning, and Victoria found herself facing 23 students ranging from 6-year-old twin boys who could barely sit still to a serious 14-year-old girl who was more advanced than some adults Victoria had known. It was challenging and exhausting and wonderful. She threw herself into teaching with fierce determination, proving to the town and to herself that she was worth the investment they had made in her. She organized the students by ability rather than age, created a lending library with books donated by families, and started a spelling bee that had the whole town talking. Within a month, the school board told her they had never been more satisfied with a teacher. Mrs. Patterson hugged her and said she was like the daughter she had never had. Miss Harriet finished her dresses and refused final payment, saying Victoria's success was payment enough. But it was Xavier's quiet pride that meant the most. He came to the school's open house in October, standing in the back with his hat in his hands, watching as Victoria led the students through their lessons. Afterward, he waited while she spoke with parents, and then walked her back to the boarding house in the gathering dusk. "You are remarkable, you know," he said as they walked. "The way you connect with those children, the way you make learning exciting for them, it is a gift." Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I am just doing my job," she said. "No," Xavier said firmly. "You are doing much more than that. You are building something that will last, giving these children opportunities they would not have otherwise. That matters." They had reached the boarding house, but neither of them moved to go inside. The autumn air was crisp and cool, and overhead, the stars were beginning to emerge. Victoria could smell wood smoke from chimneys and the pine scent that was always present in the mountains. "Xavier," she said softly, "I never properly thanked you for what you did for me on the trail. You saved my life." "You would have found a way," Xavier said. "You are a survivor." "Maybe," Victoria said, "but you made it so much easier. And more than that, you let me keep my dignity. You have no idea how much that meant to me." Xavier was quiet for a moment, his face half in shadow. When he spoke, his voice was low and serious. "I have some idea," he said. "I told you about the Ute trapper who saved me. What I did not tell you was how humiliated I felt, lying there helpless, having to be cared for like a child. He saw that in me, and he made sure I understood I was a guest, not a burden. He gave me my dignity back. I have never forgotten it." "So you were paying it forward," Victoria said. "At first," Xavier admitted. "But then I got to know you, and it became about more than that." He paused, and Victoria's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Victoria, I know this is too soon. I know you have only been here 6 weeks, that you are still establishing yourself. But I cannot stop thinking about you. Every time I ride into town, I hope I will see you. When Maggie talks about her lessons, I find myself jealous of the time she gets to spend with you. I am making a mess of this, but what I am trying to say is—" "Xavier," Victoria interrupted, her voice shaking. "I think about you too, all the time." His eyes widened, and then he was stepping closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool air. "You do?" "Yes," Victoria said. "I tried not to. I told myself it was gratitude, or that I was being foolish, or that the debt between us made anything else impossible. But the truth is, I have feelings for you, deep feelings. There is no debt, Xavier said urgently. Victoria, you have to know that. You do not owe me anything. I know that now, Victoria said. But even without the debt, there are complications. I am the school teacher. I have a reputation to maintain. If there was something between us, people would talk. Let them talk, Xavier said, and there was a fierceness in his voice she had never heard before. I do not care about gossip, I care about you. But if you need time, if you want to wait until you are more established, I can do that. I can wait as long as you need. Victoria looked at him, this kind, patient, honorable man who had appeared in her life when she most needed him. She thought about waiting, about propriety, about all the sensible reasons to be cautious. And then she thought about how life was uncertain, how her father had died in a tunnel collapse thinking he had more time, how she herself had nearly starved on a mountain pass. I do not want to wait, she said. Xavier's breath caught. Are you sure? I am sure, Victoria said. I am sure that life is short and uncertain. I am sure that you are the best man I have ever known. I am sure that when I am with you, I feel like myself again, like I am more than just someone surviving. I am sure that I am falling in love with you, Xavier Ingram, and I do not want to waste any more time pretending otherwise. For a moment, Xavier just stared at her, and Victoria wondered if she had been too bold, too forward. But then he smiled, a brilliant, joyful smile that transformed his whole face, and reached for her hands. I am falling in love with you too, he said. I think I started falling the moment I saw you sitting in the dust, exhausted and desperate, but still holding your head high. Your strength, your dignity, your courage, Victoria, you are everything I never knew I was looking for. He raised her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture so tender that Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. May I court you properly? He asked. With everyone knowing, so there is no question of impropriety, I want to do this right. Yes, Victoria said, smiling through tears. Yes, I would like that very much. Xavier pulled her into his arms then, and Victoria went willingly, resting her head against his chest and feeling the steady beat of his heart. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the gathering darkness, and Victoria felt a peace she had not known since before her mother died. I should go, Xavier said finally, though he made no move to release her. It is getting late and I have an early morning. But I will be back on Saturday. Will you have dinner with me? There is a new restaurant that opened last week. I would love to, Victoria said. He kissed her forehead, a chaste and sweet gesture that somehow felt more intimate than anything else could have been. And then he was walking to his horse, turning back twice to look at her before he rode out of town. Victoria floated up to her room, barely aware of Mrs. Patterson's knowing smile from the parlor window. The courtship that followed was the talk of Rico, but not in a scandalous way. Xavier was scrupulously proper, calling on Victoria at respectable hours, taking her on chaperoned outings, seeking Mrs. Patterson's permission for everything. But there was no hiding the depth of feeling between them, the way their eyes sought each other out in a crowded room, the way they leaned toward each other when they talked. Maggie was over the moon about the whole thing, declaring to anyone who would listen that she had known from the first day that her brother and Miss Thornton were perfect for each other. She became a frequent visitor to the boarding house, and Victoria found herself growing genuinely fond of the girl, who had a sharp wit and a generous heart. Winter came early to the mountains that year, and with it came challenges. The school had to close for a week when snow made the roads impassable. Several families faced hardship when a mine collapsed, and the whole town rallied to help. Victoria organized a fundraiser through the school, and Xavier donated beef from his herd for a community dinner. Through it all, their relationship deepened. Xavier told her about his parents' death from fever, about the desperation of those first years raising Maggie alone, about the loneliness he had felt even when he was busy from dawn to dusk. Victoria shared her own stories of loss and survival, of the months caring for her dying father, of the terror when she realized she had nothing left. "I was so angry at him," she admitted one afternoon as they sat in the schoolhouse, alone because Xavier had come to help her repair some damaged desks. "My father, I mean, for dying, for leaving me with nothing, for dragging me to Colorado in the first place. I felt so guilty about that anger." "Anger is natural," Xavier said, sanding a rough edge on a desktop. "I was angry at my parents for years, angry that they died, angry that they left me with so much responsibility. It does not mean you did not love them." "I know that now," Victoria said, "but I am also grateful in a strange way. If my father had struck silver, if he had left me provided for, I would probably have stayed in Telluride. I would never have come to Rico. I would never have met you." Xavier set down his sandpaper and crossed to where she was sitting. He took her hands in his, calloused and strong. "I am grateful too," he said, "for every circumstance that brought you to that mountain pass on that particular day. I know that is selfish, that you suffered terribly, but I cannot regret anything that led to you being here." "It is not selfish," Victoria said. "Or if it is, I am equally selfish because I feel the same way." He kissed her then, the first real kiss between them. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and when they broke apart, Victoria was smiling. "I love you," Xavier said. "I know it has only been a few months, but I know my own heart. I love you, Victoria." "I love you too," Victoria said, and felt the truth of it singing through her bones. Xavier proposed on Christmas Eve, in front of the whole town at the church Christmas pageant. He got down on one knee right there in the aisle after the children finished their nativity play, and pulled out a ring that had been his mother's. "Victoria Thornton," he said, his voice carrying through the silent church, "you came into my life when I did not even know I was lonely. You have brought joy and laughter and love into my home, into my sister's life, into my heart. I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making you as happy as you make me. Will you marry me?" Victoria did not even have to think about it. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, of course, yes." The church erupted in applause and cheers. Maggie was crying happy tears, and Mrs. Patterson was beaming like a proud mother. Even the usually stoic miners were grinning. They married in April, when the mountain meadows were full of wildflowers, and the aspens were just beginning to leaf out. It was a simple ceremony, held in the same church where Xavier had proposed, with most of the town in attendance. Maggie stood up with Victoria, and Xavier's ranch foreman stood up with him. Mrs. Patterson cried through the whole service, and even Miss Harriet dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Victoria wore a dress Miss Harriet had made specially, white silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Xavier wore his best suit, the one he saved for town occasions, and could not stop smiling. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and told Xavier he could kiss his bride, the kiss was chaste and brief, but Victoria felt it all the way to her toes. The reception was held at the boarding house, with food provided by what seemed like every family in town. There was music and dancing, and Victoria was whirled around by miners and ranchers and shop owners, all of them welcoming her officially into the community. But her favorite dance was the last one, when Xavier took her in his arms and they swayed together to a slow waltz, ignoring everyone else. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Victoria said honestly. "A year ago, I was watching my father die and wondering how I would survive. Now I am married to the most wonderful man I have ever known, with a job I love and a home and a family. It is like a dream." "Not a dream," Xavier said. "This is real, and it is ours, and it is forever." Victoria moved out of the boarding house and into the ranch with Xavier and Maggie. It was a working ranch, smaller than some but well-maintained, with a sturdy log house that Xavier had built himself over several years. Victoria's room was the master bedroom on the second floor, with windows overlooking the pastures and mountains beyond. It was an adjustment, learning to live on a ranch after years of town life. Victoria had to learn to cook for a working man's appetite, to keep house without the amenities she was used to cope with the isolation when Xavier was out on the range for long days. But she took to it with the same determination she had brought to teaching, and slowly the ranch began to feel like home. Maggie bloomed under Victoria's influence. With consistent teaching, her reading improved dramatically, and by summer she was working through novels that would have challenged many adults. She and Victoria became genuine friends, and Victoria found herself grateful for the sister she had never had. The school board was understanding about Victoria's marriage, agreeing that she could continue teaching as long as she wished. She taught through the end of the school year in June, then took the summer off to settle into married life. It was a good summer, full of hard work and laughter and love. Victoria learned to ride properly, to help with branding, to preserve the vegetables from Maggie's expanding garden. But the best part was the nights, lying in Xavier's arms in their bed, talking about their days and their dreams and their future. Xavier wanted to expand the ranch to build a larger herd. Victoria wanted to continue teaching, at least for a few more years. They both wanted children, a house full of laughter and love. "How many?" Xavier asked one night, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "Children," Victoria considered. "3, maybe 4. Enough to be a real family, but not so many that we cannot give them each attention." "I like that," Xavier said. 3 or 4 little ones running around, learning to ride, helping with chores. Maggie will be a wonderful aunt." "She will," Victoria agreed. "She has so much love to give." In September, Victoria returned to teaching, but by October she realized she was pregnant. The joy on Xavier's face when she told him was something she would treasure forever. He picked her up and spun her around, whooping like a child, then set her down gently as if she were made of glass. "Are you all right? Should you be standing? Do you need to sit down?" he fussed. Victoria laughed. "I am fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am not fragile." But Xavier treated her like she was precious, which she supposed she was to him. He took over her heavier chores, fretted when she got tired, and built a cradle in the barn workshop that was a work of art. Victoria taught through December, then reluctantly resigned her position. It was harder to leave than she had expected. She loved teaching, loved the children, loved the sense of purpose it gave her. But she also knew that motherhood would bring its own challenges and rewards. Their son was born in June of 1886, a healthy baby boy with Xavier's dark hair and Victoria's green eyes. They named him Thomas, after Xavier's father, and from the moment Victoria held him, she understood a love she had never imagined possible. Xavier was a devoted father, walking the floor with Thomas when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, singing off key lullabies that made Victoria smile. Maggie was equally smitten, constantly wanting to hold her nephew and help with his care. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered, helped by Xavier's hard work and increasingly good decisions. Victoria found fulfillment in motherhood, though she sometimes missed teaching. When Thomas was a year old, She started offering informal lessons to some of the ranch hands who wanted to learn to read, and found it satisfied her need to teach without overwhelming her. 2 years after Thomas was born, they had a daughter, whom they named Sarah after Victoria's mother. She was a quiet baby, thoughtful and observant even as an infant, and she had her father's blue-gray eyes. Xavier was even more protective of his daughter than he had been of his son, declaring that any boy who wanted to court her in the future would have to pass through him first. Maggie married in 1889, a steady young man named Daniel who ran the general store. It was bittersweet watching her move into her own home in town, but she visited the ranch frequently, and Victoria was glad to see her so happy. In 1891, Victoria gave birth to another son, Robert, who had red hair that mystified both parents until Victoria remembered her grandmother had been a redhead. Robert was louder and more energetic than his siblings, keeping Victoria on her toes from the moment he could crawl. Xavier expanded the ranch steadily over the years, buying adjoining land when it became available, building up his herd, earning a reputation for fair dealing and quality livestock. Victoria managed the household, raised the children, and found small ways to contribute to the community. She organized a lending library in town, started a quilting circle for the ranch wives, and occasionally substituted at the school when the current teacher needed help. It was not the life she had imagined when she was a girl in Kansas, dreaming of adventure. It was better. It was real and sometimes hard and always full of love. One evening in late summer of 1894, Victoria sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Thomas was 11 now, Sarah 9, and Robert 3. Thomas was helping Xavier with the evening chores, already showing signs of the man he would become. Sarah was reading to Robert inside, her patient voice drifting through the open window. Xavier came up the porch steps and sank into the chair beside her with a satisfied sigh. "Good day," he said. "Good day," Victoria agreed. She reached for his hand and he laced his fingers through hers. "You ever regret it?" Xavier asked suddenly. "Giving up teaching, living out here instead of in town where there is more society?" Victoria considered the question seriously. She had never lied to Xavier and she was not about to start now. "Sometimes I miss teaching," she said honestly. "I loved it and I was good at it, but I would not trade this life for anything. These children, this home, you are everything I never knew I needed." "I think about that day I found you on the trail," Xavier said quietly. "How different our lives would be if I had ridden past, or stopped an hour earlier or later. It seems impossible that so much joy could hinge on such chance." "Maybe it was not chance," Victoria said. "Maybe it was meant to be. Either way, I am grateful. You saved my life that day, Xavier, not just from starvation, but from despair. You gave me hope when I had none left." "You saved me too," Xavier said. "I did not even realize how lonely I was until you showed me what it felt like not to be alone. You brought light into my life, Victoria. You and our children, you make everything worthwhile." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the mountains and the first stars appeared. Inside, Sarah's voice rose and fell, telling some story to her little brother. From the barn, they could hear Thomas laughing at something Xavier's foreman had said. This was happiness, Victoria thought. Not the dramatic, sweeping kind from novels, but the quiet, steady kind built day by day, moment by moment. The kind that came from surviving hardship together and choosing each other every single day. "I love you," she said, squeezing Xavier's hand. "I love you too," Xavier said. "Always have, always will." As the years continued to pass, the Ingram family became a cornerstone of the Rico community. Xavier served on the town council, helping to make decisions about infrastructure and development. Victoria, though no longer the official teacher, was considered the unofficial educator for the whole region, always ready with advice or a book recommendation or tutoring for a child who was struggling. Thomas grew into a fine young man, serious and hardworking like his father. By 16, he was essentially running half the ranch operations, and Xavier relied on him more and more. Sarah discovered a talent for drawing and painting, capturing the beauty of the mountains in watercolors that people actually wanted to buy. Robert remained the wild one, always getting into scrapes, but with a good heart that kept him from going too far astray. In 1898, when Thomas was 18, he announced his intention to start his own ranch on the far edge of their property, where Xavier had recently acquired additional land. It was bittersweet for Victoria, watching her firstborn strike out on his own, but she was proud of his ambition and capability. Xavier helped him build a house and gave him a starter herd, and within 2 years, Thomas was courting a sensible girl from town named Margaret. Sarah, at 16, was still more interested in her art than in boys, though Victoria suspected that would change soon enough. She was beautiful in an understated way, with a quiet confidence that reminded Victoria of herself at that age. Robert, now 11, was finally starting to settle down slightly, though he still had more energy than the rest of the family combined. One afternoon, in early spring of 1900, Victoria was working in her garden when she heard a wagon approaching. She looked up to see a young woman driving, with a broken wheel that was barely holding together, almost exactly like Victoria's own wagon 16 years before. The young woman pulled to a stop in front of the house, and Victoria could see the exhaustion and desperation in her face, the too thin frame that spoke of hunger, the worn clothes and hollow eyes. It was like looking at a ghost of her younger self. "Excuse me," the young woman said, her voice hoarse. "I am looking for Rico. Is it much farther?" "About 5 miles, Victoria said gently. "But your wheel is not going to make it. Come inside. Let me give you some water and food, and my husband can look at your wagon." The young woman's eyes filled with tears. "I do not have money to pay you," she said, the words clearly costing her. "I am not asking for payment," Victoria said. "I am offering hospitality. There is a difference." She saw the moment the young woman understood, the way her shoulders relaxed slightly even as her chin came up. "That is very kind," she said with as much dignity as she could muster. "I would be grateful." Victoria helped her down from the wagon and led her into the house, calling for Sarah to bring water and food. As she watched the young woman drink carefully, trying not to gulp, trying to maintain some semblance of manners despite obvious starvation, Victoria felt the past and present merge. Xavier came in from the barn and stopped short, his eyes going from the young woman to Victoria and back again. Victoria saw understanding dawn in his face, saw him recognize the echo of the day they met. "This is Miss." Victoria paused. "Jenny," the young woman supplied. "Jenny Williams." "I am supposed to be the new teacher in Rico, but I am starting to think I will never make it there." "You will make it," Xavier said firmly. "We will make sure of it. I am Xavier Ingram, and this is my wife Victoria. She used to be the teacher in Rico, actually, before we married." Jenny's eyes widened. "Really? Oh, I have heard about you. The school board mentioned you in their letter. They said you set a standard that has been hard to match." "I just did my best," Victoria said, setting a plate of food in front of Jenny. "Please eat. And then we can talk about getting you to Rico." As Jenny ate, trying to maintain dignity and failing because of her obvious hunger, Victoria caught Xavier's eye. He smiled at her, a smile full of memory and love and shared understanding. They had come full circle, from that day on the mountain past to this moment, able to offer help because they had survived their own hardships. After Jenny had eaten and rested, Xavier fixed her wagon wheel and loaded her up with provisions. Victoria gave her advice about the school and the town, about which families would be supportive and which children might need extra attention. When Jenny finally drove away toward Rico, stronger and more hopeful than when she had arrived, Victoria felt a sense of satisfaction that went soul deep. "That was good of you," Xavier said, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they watched the wagon disappear down the road. "We have been blessed," Victoria said. "It seems only right to share that blessing when we can." "You share it every day," Xavier said. "With me, with our children, with everyone you meet. It is one of the things I love most about you." Victoria turned in his arms to face him. He was 45 now, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to her, he was as handsome as the day he had ridden up to her broken wagon, offering help without judgment. "And I love you," she said, "for seeing someone in need and offering kindness, for being the kind of man who makes the world better just by being in it." He kissed her, a kiss that still held passion even after 15 years of marriage, and Victoria felt the same flutter in her stomach that she had felt that first time. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Victoria thought about the journey that had brought her here. From that desperate day on the mountain, starving and alone, to this moment of abundance and love. She had survived on pride and rainwater, and Xavier had offered food without hurting her dignity. In doing so, he had offered her a future she could never have imagined. The years continued to flow like water over stones, smoothing the rough edges, deepening the channels. Thomas married his Margaret in 1901 and gave Victoria and Xavier their first grandchild, a boy named David, in 1902. Sarah surprised everyone by falling in love with a painter from Denver who had come to the mountains for inspiration. They married in 1903 and settled in Colorado Springs, where Sarah established herself as a respected artist. Robert, true to form, had a harder time settling down, but eventually he found his calling as a horse breeder and married a spirited girl who could match him for energy. Maggie and Daniel had 4 children of their own, and the extended family gatherings were loud and chaotic and full of love. Victoria's hair turned gray, and Xavier's back started to ache on cold mornings, but they faced aging together with the same partnership they had brought to everything else. In 1910, on their 26th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Victoria back to the spot where they had first met. It took some doing to find it. The trail had been improved over the years, and landmarks had changed, but eventually they stood on the same stretch of rocky ground where Victoria's wagon had broken down so many years before. "I was so scared that day," Victoria said, looking around at the mountains that had become so familiar. "I thought I was going to die on this trail, alone and forgotten." "But you did not," Xavier said, holding her hand tightly. "You survived and you thrived and you built a life that has touched so many people. Our children, our grandchildren, all the students you taught, they all exist because you refused to give up that day." "I exist because you stopped," Victoria corrected. "Because you saw someone in need and helped without making them feel small. That changed everything, Xavier. That one act of kindness changed my entire life." "It changed mine too," Xavier said. "I thought I was content before I met you, but I was just going through the motions. You gave me purpose, joy, love, everything that makes life worth living." They stood there for a long moment, remembering and grateful. Then they rode back to the ranch, to the house full of memories, to the life they had built together from the ashes of loss and the seeds of kindness. Victoria lived to see her children all settled and happy, to hold 9 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. She lived to see Rico grow from a rough mining town to an established community with paved streets and electric lights. She lived to see automobiles replace horses, airplanes fill the skies, and the world change in ways she could never have imagined as a girl in Kansas. But through all the changes, one thing remained constant: Xavier's love. Every morning he still brought her coffee in bed. Every evening they still sat on the porch watching the sunset. Every night they still talked about their day and their dreams, even when those dreams were more about their grandchildren's futures than their own. In 1925, Xavier died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 70, with Victoria holding his hand. It was the way he would have wanted to go quickly, without fuss, in his own bed on his beloved ranch. But it left Victoria bereft in a way she had not been since her father's death all those years ago. Thomas ran the ranch now, and he invited Victoria to stay, but she chose instead to move back to Rico, to the very boarding house where she had first stayed. Mrs. Patterson was long dead, but the current owner welcomed her warmly, and Victoria found comfort in being back in town, surrounded by people and activity. She lived another 5 years, active and engaged until the very end. She read to the schoolchildren every week, advised young teachers, and told stories about the old days to anyone who would listen. Her children and grandchildren visited regularly, and she never lacked for company or purpose. On a warm summer evening in 1930, Victoria passed away in her sleep, just shy of her 73rd birthday. Her funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire town of Rico and half the county besides. People came to pay respects to the woman who had taught them, or their parents, or their children, who had been a fixture of the community for 46 years, who had lived a life of quiet grace and strength. They buried her next to Xavier on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains that had witnessed their love story. The headstone was simple: Victoria Thornton Ingram, 1857–1930, beloved wife, mother, teacher, friend. But her real legacy was not carved in stone. It was in the lives she had touched, the children she had taught, the kindness she had shown and inspired in others. It was in her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried her values forward into the future. It was in the story that was told for generations about the schoolteacher who arrived in Rico with nothing but pride and determination, and the cowboy who saw past her poverty to the woman she truly was. It was a love story that began with an act of kindness and ended with a life well lived, with family and community and purpose. It was a testament to the truth that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the simplest gestures: a meal offered, dignity preserved, humanity recognized. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the hardships they had endured or the obstacles they had overcome, but the love they had built together, day by day, moment by moment, from that first meeting on a dusty mountain trail to their final rest on a hillside overlooking home. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West, but also as timeless and universal as love itself, the story of two people who found each other when they needed each other most, and built a lifetime of happiness from that chance encounter. The ranch continued for generations, passed from Thomas to his children and grandchildren, always kept in the family, always bearing the mark of Xavier and Victoria's partnership. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, those who lived there swore they could feel the presence of the two people who had founded it all, the cowboy and the teacher, who had loved each other so well and so truly that their love seemed to have soaked into the very land itself. A blessing and a promise that endures beyond death, beyond time, into eternity.